the emergence of the beginning of our scientific knowledge of astronomy, the creation of the Royal Society for the exploration of all of the natural history of mankind. These movements were all part of what was referred to then as the way of tomorrowness, a looking into the future and the gradual building of a great structure of world knowledge founded upon the firm foundation of the inductive system of reason. Now, who would likely be able to spearhead such a movement? Only a person who had this look of tomorrowness, who was himself in some way concerned with the transition between Aristotelian scholasticism and the rise of modern humanism. It is said that our father C.R.C., returning from his travels at Fez and Damcar in North Africa and the Near East, returned or retired to a monastery, and there he began the compilation of the encyclopedia of all knowledge. It was his purpose to prepare a work in which everything known to man might be made available to the scholars of this new age. He may have worked very hard, he might have been very industrious in his endeavors, but needless to say, no such a work ever appeared under his name, nor was any work available at the time at which he was supposed to have functioned. The only actual example of the type of work which he was devoted to was the Instauratio Magna of Lord Bacon. This was, as Bacon himself declared, to be an encyclopedia of all knowledge, necessary, useful, or possible to man. That he worked and labored through his years to produce this work, we know. And we also know that the Novum Organum, regarded as the first textbook of modern science, was Lord Bacon's masterpiece, and it was the first section of the Instauratio Magna. So here we have a man living at the time when the first manifestos were published. None were published earlier. Doing the very work that the author of the unknown book was said to be concerned with. There were many other parallels also, but we must find some explanation for the rise of a sudden point of view. We don't solve everything in this way, but I think we solve something. I think we become a little closer to the necessary foundations of our subject. Mr. Waite, trying to explore his aspect of the field, makes a pretty thorough survey of the alchemists and the alchemistical philosophers who flourished about the time of the beginnings of the Rosicrucian controversy, or shortly before that time. He examines their elaborate symbolical works, their mystical theses, and their strange and wonderful formulas in an effort to discover, if possible, a route for Rosicrucianism in this area. Naturally, he fails, for the simple reason that these necessary links are not available according to his point of view. There is no evidence, for example, that the alchemistical philosophers ever used any of the essentially Rosicrucian devices or symbols. And there is no proof that the Rosicrucians ever actually made use of the alchemical symbols in any outward or common sense. There is only one possible way in which these groups can be linked. There is every possibility that the alchemists were actually concerned with the same end, namely social regeneration, that concerned the Rosicrucian order. But the alchemists were a very spectacular group. Their wonderful old books are filled with the most elaborate diagrams and symbols. The regularly issued texts of the Rosicrucian Society are either unillustrated or but slightly so. They do not make use of these elaborate devices and designs, certainly not in the first circle of the apologists and supposed authors of the works. We may then have parallel motions, motions which might bridge at times. For if there were any Rosicrucians to be discovered, the best candidates are among the alchemists. Also, we realize that about the time that these manifestos of the Rosy Cross began to appear, there was a considerable impulse toward the elaboration of alchemical writings. Most of the best texts, most extravagantly illustrated volumes, were issued within 10 or 15 years of the appearance of the Rosicrucian manifestos. There is a package here somewhere, but the two groups seem to have at least a physical separation. They do not intermingle in the common sense of the word, although there are certain indications of possible sympathy between them. Arriving then at the beginning of the historical cycle of Rosicrucianism, we look around to see if we can names or persons that might well be associated with this society. Two names of well-known persons in the chemical and mystical literature of the period stand out. One was the English physician Robert Fludd, and the other the German chemist Michael Meyer. Both of these men wrote about Rosicrucianism. Meyer in particular also wrote considerably about alchemy. The Frankfurt publisher Theodore de Bry illustrated many of the writings of both of these men, and also many emblem books and other significant volumes which appeared about the same time. Fludd writes quite enthusiastically about the Rosy Cross, gives a long and learned discourse about the habits of the Brotherhood, which actually says nothing, and then at the end states clearly that he claims no membership. This sort of eliminates him unless we wish to assume that he lied in print. The other possible candidate that we have, Michael Meyer, who was a nobleman and a counselor to his king, does write also about the Rosicrucians. He discusses them and mentions them and describes their habitations in Germany. But before he gets through, he also proves conclusively that he knew nothing about them. The next important work comes out is also by Meyer, called The Laws of the Fraternity of the Rosy Cross. Here Meyer really does quite an impressive job. He writes a small book in which he gives all the rules, laws, and proper credo of the society. Unfortunately, however, he once again says nothing, for all he has done is taken the original material in the Fama and enlarged upon it. He has made extensive definitions of the various rules briefly stated there. But when we get through with the book, he has really added nothing new. So we summarize the situation as it stands in the 17th century. Three books appear. The Fame and Confession of the Society of the Rosy Cross, published in 1614, possibly available as early as 1612, sometime in manuscript. It is believed they were circulated. And a third work, the Chemical Marriage of Christian Rosenkreutz, which appeared 2 years later. Now, in the Fame and Confession, our illustrious brother C.R.C. is never referred to by anything except initials. He is delivered to us as Christian Rosenkreutz only in the Chemical Marriage. Now, the question that must further be established is, from a critical standpoint, is the chemical marriage in any way an actual manifesto of the society? Flood did equally well in writing on Rosicrucian material at the same time, and at the end insists that he doesn't know the order and has never met a member of it. Meyer did a splendid job with the same negative conclusion. Therefore, as the Feynman Confession had been in circulation for 2 years, are we really entitled to assume that the chemical marriage was an actual official production of the society, or was it one of the many logia that appeared during the next 5 or 10 years? We like to assume, for practical purposes, that it probably was, directly or indirectly, a manifesto. If it can be traced to Bacon, we probably have every reason to assume that it was a genuine work. Whether we can trace the Feynman Confession to Bacon is another problem. But here again you can have a lot of fun. It is assumed that the author of all of these works, that is, of the Feynman Confession, was a German. And of course it is assumed that the author of the chemical marriage was a German. While these works may have been published in Germany, the German author had some troubles. When he got stuck for a word which might be a little unusual in German, he usually used an English word, which might possibly imply that English was his mother tongue. Or it may have been put there on purpose to create this question in the mind of the reader. Anyway, it is a valid question. For in an emergency or in some strange abstraction of language, it might well be that we would fill in with some word more familiar to us. But let us assume for the moment that these 3 books were all genuine productions. We have to question the appendix of the Fama Fraternitatis, wherein to this was added a small work by Boccolini, an Italian author, on the universal reformation of mankind. It was all of a theme, but this work only appears in one edition of the Feynman Confession. So here we are with 3 books looking for an author. These 3 books stand completely alone, and every effort to tie them successfully to any other group of literature seems to be little better than useless. Waite comes to this conclusion, that these 3 books stand alone, and then he begins to ask himself whether these books stand, or whether the whole group of volumes fall together. This is a question which I don't think we can fairly take. I prefer the more moderate course of assuming that some person or persons with a real and definite purpose, and perhaps speaking for a private society devoted to esoteric, mystical, or even religio-political activities, did issue these manifestos. That for one reason or another, nothing further transpired. We were assured that these would appear in many languages. Actually, they did not. The only time when they appeared in any other language was much later, when they were translated. They were not simultaneously issued in 5 tongues or anything of that nature. And the various announcements and pronouncements contained within the volumes seemingly never were fulfilled. To show how the situation was in the year of grace 1616, we might have to compare it to some strange thing that might arise today, where suddenly there would be thrown upon us a most solemn and apparently official document affirming the existence of some strange or secret government and inviting us all to join in this great movement for the regeneration